On today's podcast, you are going to get tremendous value. I hosted Greg Novarro, who is an author and a coach on interviewing and interview consulting. Whether you are the person doing the interviewing or you are the interviewee, especially if you're the interviewee, you definitely need to listen to this podcast because Greg is going to drop some knowledge bombs. In fact, in this podcast, he says something that is so simple yet so brilliant. I kick myself for not having done it for so many years in my career. So I know you're going to get value out of this, regardless of which side of the table you're sitting on, either the interviewer or the interviewee. These are great professional skills to have, and Greg's going to help you hone those. Enjoy. I am super excited to welcome our guest this week. His name is Greg Novarro. Greg's a 28-year veteran of the pharmaceutical industry and also worked in the medical device industry. But more importantly, he's the author of 4 #1 Amazon new release books in the category of interviewing for sales positions. He also has a consulting company that helps people craft a more effective resume so that when somebody sees your resume, they respond to it and they reach out to you. And he also coaches clients on how to interview so that they get the job offer. And this all started because even after winning every salesperson and leadership award you could win with the companies that he worked for, he was still a victim of 4 layoffs in a 28-year career. So that led him to help others in the same situation through books and coaching, etc. So I know today's guest is going to help you in many ways, especially if you're going to interview in the future, or honestly, even if you are going to be the interviewer in the future, which is basically all of us fit into one of those 2 categories. So I know you'll benefit from this. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks, Roger. I really appreciate it. And I'm really happy to be here too.
Oh man, it's great to have you. So you have an interesting journey. So you've been in the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, medical device industry for almost 30 years. You've been laid off 4 times, which is never a fun situation, yet you're a top performer. And I know that personally about you. So walk me through, like, how did you get from you're working in these big pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, to you have 4 #1 books on Amazon and you have this coaching and interviewing consultancy practice. Talk to me about that.
I always say, Roger, it all happened by accident and I wasn't looking for it. It was the first layoff that was the worst. I had left a company where we knew each other at Sepracor for 9 years, and I left for the right reasons. I just went to the wrong place. And 6 months after I had left, I found myself laid off for the first time in my career. And I had been in the industry 11 years at that point.
What'd that feel like?
Yeah, gosh, I went through every emotion possible. Like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? I can't believe this. Fear of not being able to, provide for your family, fear that I was going to lose my whole house. And then it was also, I could get over this no problem. This is going to be easy for me. And this was 2009 when it was a massive layoff point in the industry. I think we actually went from about 150,000 reps in the industry, and now there's only about 60,000. Wow. But this was the real start of the major layoffs that occurred over the next 4 or 5 years for the industry. And so after that first layoff, I honestly, and I say this to everyone, I was overconfident. I tried too hard oftentimes on interviews. I did too much during interviews. I said too much during the interviews, and I didn't network well enough. This was at the almost like infancy of LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And I failed miserably, and I was out of work for a year.
Wow.
And yeah, I almost lost everything. I literally had $10,000 left to my name, still in my house, still paid everybody, and then finally got another role. And that role lasted about another year and a half. And that was a great layoff though. Because that layoff, we found out 3 months previously what was going to happen. And so it gave me a lot of time. And I had 6 months severance after only being there a year and a half. So right after I got laid off, 2 weeks later, another job.
That's great. Just for the audience, the pharmaceutical industry is kind of a unique industry, maybe not too dissimilar to tech, but they will go out and hire, at least in the past, I know that as you said, the industry has scaled down. but it was almost an arms race in the past where they would hire 500 people at a time, 1,000 people at a time in anticipation of a drug getting FDA approval. So all these people would come to work for a company. You would start pre-selling the drug or the therapy or what the condition, and then the drug would hopefully be approved, and then all the reps go to work and start marketing the drug. But when there's a non-approval, the company literally has no other choice but to say, this is a non-starter. Thanks for playing, but you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. and so that's sounds like that's kind of what happened with the second layoff.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. The second layoff, the drug just wasn't doing as well as they had expected. They overhired, and so they really scaled down a lot. And there was only 3 of us national sales directors, and then they cut down to getting rid of all of us, and the VP of sales took over everything with only about 50 reps in the whole company.
Yeah.
But that was a good situation. And I say that because, it helped me make up for some of the loss I had in that year's having a layoff, got some of my money back. And so then I got with a company, and I was with them for 5 years. Great organization, started a hospital sales force with them, really loved it. But then they ended up merging with several other companies, buying actually a couple other companies. And through those mergers, there was another layoff. Again, this was another great layoff for me. I was there for 5 years. They gave me 9 months of severance. I was able to bank some more money. Stock was worth a lot more. And so then it was at this point that I decided to kind of just see what I really wanted to do. Took a few months off, but then someone gave me an email and then called me and said, "Hey, I know you've been through this several different times. I'd really like some help." And I go, "Sure, I'll help you out. No problem." He goes, "No, I want to pay you." I go, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, because if I pay you, you'll take it more seriously."
True.
I go, "Wow, he's got a good point."
Yeah. The more they pay,
good point.
The more they pay attention.
That's right.
Yeah.
So ironically, I never helped that person out until just recently. They never ended up taking me up on it. However, that got me the idea to go, well, there's got to be more people out there like that. I'm laid off. I might as well try this out. So I started posting on LinkedIn. And then I started getting more and more people calling me and needing help in interviewing in their resumes. So it really started growing faster. And then to be honest, I got tired of telling people the same thing over and over again. And I told my wife, Melanie, I said, I'm going to write a book. She goes, "That's stupid." And it's like, "Really? Why?" She goes, "Well, because if you write the book, no one's going to call you to hire you." And I go, "No, more people will. It's just they'll hire me for the more important stuff of really getting into the deep down of the interview and this other stuff about LinkedIn and about how to help you improve your resume, how to network, and the other stuff about my coaching and what I do on the interview." I said, it'll give them kind of clip notes. And so I honestly wrote it just so that it could help save people money. So it actually goes through about an hour to 2 hours of content that I would go through with people one-on-one.
Yeah.
And figured for $30, they could save a lot of money rather than having to pay me by the hour. Well, what happened was when I launched that first book, it did so surprisingly well, and I was totally blown away by it. That it was a Amazon #1 bestseller in my category in the first month.
That's great.
And I'm like, wow, I had something going here.
Yeah.
And then I could have continued to do that, but then I was missing a team.
Yeah.
I missed being out and about. I didn't want to be sitting behind my desk all day long. I was younger. That was what I was 46 at the time. So that was 7 years ago. And I was like, I just can't sit behind my desk all day long. I need to be out. So I got back into the industry again, where I'm currently at. While I was interviewing, I let them know, look, this is my passion. This is what I love to do. I love to help people. I've been laid off 4 times. I want to help folks, and I want to be able to do this on the side. And the guy who hired me said, absolutely love it. He goes, you'll be helping yourself with your coaching. You'll find out what's going on in the industry. You'll find good talent. We'll know what's going on with our competition. Yes, just keep doing it. And so that was 6 years ago. And it has exploded so much that I've had to bring on another person to help me out, another colleague, that when I'm too busy, that this person's able to help me as well.
Yeah. So that's amazing. And I think that's how so many entrepreneurial ventures are started, it's out of a need. And it's usually the entrepreneur solving his or her own need that, or trying to solve that need, that puts them into, this new category, and then they start a business. So not unusual, but always super cool to hear the genesis story of it. So walk me through that first book gets launched and people are buying the book, which is always got to be a validating feeling. And then, what did you learn, I guess, during that writing process that you could share, that even before you got into the writing process, you really hadn't thought of, and getting it down on paper really brought it to life?
And I think the first thing is that I could get this published on my own. I didn't need a publishing company. Amazon made it so easy that I could do it myself for a few $100s. I found some guys on the internet who would take whatever you wrote in Word, and they would convert it to the systems for Amazon, both for the Kindle version and for the paperback. Then I learned how to improve upon the initial product.
Yeah.
My initial product wasn't very good, to be honest. And so
we call that a minimum viable product.
Just get it out there.
Yeah.
And the cover was terrible, but it still sold because I think, like you said, the need was there and people kind of understood what I was talking about. And so I think it was really through the second and third product where I was able to improve my cover and really use different software online to make it more presentable and to really be able to capture someone's attention better. And I learned not to print in color, because when you print in color, you waste a lot of money.
Sure.
And I became much more profitable. Not that you make a lot from books, because you don't, but every cent counts. And so my newer versions are all in black and white, and there's a reason for it, because color's way too expensive.
Love it.
But the marketing part was another thing I learned a lot about too, which through LinkedIn, the marketing part was, I learned to tell stories when I was marketing. I would look and see what times that I post on LinkedIn. And if I added a link, I would get less people to see it. And so I added pictures instead. And when I told stories and would connect with more people and would tell their stories, more people would engage. And so that's what I learned a lot about that early on too.
Cool. Really cool. So most people, they love the story. They love to hear how it comes to be. But people tuning in probably saw the headline on this podcast and thought, I could be a better interviewer. I could be a better interviewee. I need to be a better interviewee. I've got a job coming up. This podcast is about business, health, and wealth. But not everybody owns a business. There's a lot of intrapreneurs and people that work inside a company but grow a wonderful career and have a very nice living. But interviewing is a key part of that, because as you move up the ladder, you have to interview for each one of those. You usually have to interview for each one of those positions. So your books are, in fact, I've got them right here. Greg has a couple books, but Acing the Sales Interview, and this is the third edition, so it's been updated. He has some additional information around LinkedIn. And then this one I love too is he interviewed 50, and I want to hear about this. He interviewed 50 President's Circle winning managers who interview. They're the reason they're President's Circle winners is because they know how to build a team, how to hire a team, how to find that talent. And he actually lists their favorite 50 questions, which quite frankly, you'll probably be asked. And he shares with you the best ways to answer those. And I love how you also say it must be genuine, never lie, never, this is about the genuine, authentic you coming out. So if we can, let's give the listeners some real value here. How do you prepare for an interview? What should you expect? How do you ace a sales interview, or really any interview for that matter?
Well, that's a long question, and it's probably even longer answer, but I'll try and make it so that your listeners can really get a lot of help from this. And I think the first part is when you first go into applying, it's to make sure that you're just not applying for the interview. There's a lot of planning that went into my strategy of interviewing. So the biggest mistakes I made earlier on when I was learning all this information was, gosh, if you just apply, if you just send your resume out, the likelihood that you're going to get that interview is extremely low. Yeah. You could get lucky, you could get a call back, but it really has to go with building up your network well before you even need the interview. And that's where LinkedIn has really become, for me, the major avenue for getting hired. And I know a lot of my colleagues feel the same way. So it's building up that network. It's making sure you're constantly, even when you don't need a job, constantly connecting with people and companies that where you want to work at. Because if you see a job there, you can reach out to those people, even if you don't know them, and say, hey, I am out of work, or I am working at a current company, but I'm interested in your company. Would you mind getting on the phone with me and chatting for a few minutes to talk about your experience at that company? This is key before ever trying to get an interview, because getting the, and I tell a lot of people is you're going to be surprised by how many people will say, sure, yeah, I'll talk to you, even though they don't know you.
Yeah.
Because you're at least connected with them on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Then they also know, hey, I could be in this other person's situation at any time too. And I would love that kind of same help from someone else. So it's this reciprocal kind of, hey, I'll help out another person. Yep. So then the idea is to really ask that person lots of questions. Anything you really want to know about the company. What do they love? What do they don't? Tell me about the scars there. Tell me about what I won't find out from the hiring manager. All these things. And then eventually you want to get them to be your referral. You don't ask that up front because you don't have a relationship with them yet. You want to build that relationship and the reason why you want that referral is because referrals go right to the top. At my current company, and I've verified this with so many other companies, you will see your referral candidates at the top of your, your web page, whatever it is you use, your software. Referrals go to the top. So, and if you're a referral, and if you're the hiring manager, and I know when I see a referral, I feel obligated to interview that person.
Sure.
Because it came from someone else inside the company. So your chances go way up. And actually LinkedIn says 85% of people get hired through referrals.
Wow.
So that's their actual number. So that in and itself, that doesn't help you on the interview, but at least gets you to the tape.
Yeah.
Right. That's one of the key areas.
Okay.
I think the next thing in order to plan for the interview is something a lot of people miss. And I know, Roger, you, being a CEO, you love this, is looking at the financials of an organization. Sure. Really knowing whether this is a place you want to go to work at or not. I've talked probably more people out of interviewing for a company by looking at their financials and saying, are you really sure you want to go work for this company? And consulting with them to saying, hey, have you looked? Have you looked at what their sales are? Have you looked at what the EBITDA is? Have you looked at what their debt is? Have you looked at, what their cash flow is? Have you looked at what their burn rate is? All these things, because that's important. And a lot of people will spend more time looking at the house they're going to buy than the company that they're going to go work for. And they're going to be spending a lot more time at that company than they even will in that house. So those are just a few nuggets, I think, that are really, really important for people. And in my book, I really explain how to go through a lot of those financials to figure out whether this is the right place for you or not.
Yeah. Greg actually has literally infographics and pictures showing you where you can go on Yahoo Finance and literally see the health of the company, and explains that in very simple terms so that you can do it quickly. So it's very helpful. So as they're getting, I also remember reading last night, I went through his books as recently as last night, that you wrote that no matter what they say, don't show up in business casual, dress to the nines, and show up like you mean business. And just speak to that, because in today's environment, I'm literally in a black t-shirt doing this podcast, and everything's kind of been, chilled out. But you're very adamant about that in your book.
Absolutely. And as for people who can see the video, I'm in scrubs. So yeah. I still wear, my company went to scrubs from COVID, and I never want to go back to wearing a suit again. But that was my life for 25, or let's say 23 of those 27 years in the industry, 28 years in the industry, was wearing a suit every day. And is the expectation. You want to dress over what they do expect, because I don't care whether I'm wearing scrubs to the interview or the other, and we're in casual. I will definitely, it's the first impression idea, right? If someone dresses for the part, I'm going to be thinking of them differently. And we all have bias, whether we like it or not. And if that person just looks more presentable, we are in a professional atmosphere. You should always assume that you should be dressing to the nines. It's better to dress up than to dress down completely.
Yeah, 100%. So I know that we're both schooled in the ideology of competency selection interviewing, which for the audience is really asking more about what candidates have accomplished in their past, why they made certain decisions, what they were thinking, why they chose certain actions or a certain strategy to overcome, an obstacle, because past behavior is the best predictor of future performance. But a lot of people know that now. The internet has kind of, exposed the fact that a lot of us will use competency selection interviewing not to trick the candidate, but to really give the candidate an opportunity to get deep into their experience. And you can tell, I mean, I'd love for you to speak to this, but you can kind of tell who was on the ship and who was actually driving the ship, so to speak, or piloting the ship. So talk to me about, if you could, and talk to listeners about preparing for a competency selection interview if you're the interviewee.
So if you're the interviewee and you know that there's going to be 3 or 4 competency-based questions. So if you're in sales, especially, you should always be preparing for, tell me about a time that you had to have some significant results and you had to overcome some obstacles. That's the number one question you're going to have to be able to answer. And it should be something that's happened for at least 6 months to a year. And what I usually am coaching people, they pick examples that are too short and they can't really explain what they did, or they go into so much detail that they overwhelm someone and they're bored after the fact. So you really have to make sure you're practicing and you're structuring out your answers. And so one of the things that I recommend people do is write out a timeline. Everyone knows what a timeline looks at. It's a horizontal line with a vertical line on one end and a vertical line at the other, and it's a start of a time period and end to another. And I tell people, write it out. Write out what the start date was. And a lot of people, what they forget to do in these competency-based interviews is to forget to even tell them when the start date was and tell them where they were working and tell them what product they were selling. And they forget to tell them what the end date is too and the time period. That's so important, and it shouldn't be overlooked. What they also forget to do is tell them what they were thinking at the time, what they were feeling, what was going through their head. And this will get the person who's the interviewer to understand their strategy. It'll get them to understand that they really did do what they're talking about, because that's something as the interviewer that I'm looking for, to say, hey, did this person, like you said, were they really there, or did they really do it? Or are they taking the credit for something somebody else did? And they should give a lot of specifics, as many as they can, without boring the person. So this then goes to the stage of storytelling. It's when you are able to tell a start, time period, and what was going on, potentially what was even happening before the start date. Hey, what was life like at your current job, and what was going on? What were the struggles before? And then what was that start date, and what was so significant about that start date that you chose it to start that story? And then what was going through your head and what you had to accomplish? And what they're looking for here is that positive thinking. They're looking for, hey, were you thinking about what the obstacles could be in the future? Were you thinking about alternate strategies even in the start of the story? And then how you handled each milestone in each aspect of the story. How did you overcome those things? What were some of the positive things that you had to do? And by the way, in a lot of these situations, the end result does not have to be that you did what you said you were going to do.
Yeah.
Some of it could be a failure. And then what you learn from that failure, because that maybe would lead to your next story.
Yeah.
So in all this aspect of what I tell people to do is practice all of the scenarios that you could possibly get. Have 3 or 4 stories ready that you could then plug into each one of your answers. And what I see a lot of people do too is they rush through their answers. They think, hey, if I just get through this, if I hit the situation, if I hit the task, if I hit the action, and I hit the result, then I've done it. But that's not the case a lot of times.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're just rushing through it too often. And if they bore the other person, they're not gonna win that either.
Yeah, and when you say have 3 or 4 stories ready, I think in our culture, story means fable, right? We almost liken it to where grandpa has exaggerated the truth around the fire camp, or around the campfire or whatever. But I'm sure you've read the same things where, storytelling is how we communicate as humans. And it's certainly how we paint a vivid picture of what happened. And the best public speakers are nothing more than just great storytellers. But when Greg says, have 3 or 4 stories, he's not saying make up 3 or 4 things, so you sound like, you saved the world. 3 or 4 things you've actually accomplished that you're proud of, but tell it in a story format, right? Like tell it like you were painting, as we said, you're writing a Hollywood script, and I want to know all the details and what does the set look like and what were they wearing, and and really, because if you put the interviewer in that mind frame, I can only imagine that you're going to have a better chance of that interviewer remembering you long after the interview.
Well, you make a good point too. And in our industry, in the pharmaceutical industry and medical device and healthcare and whatever, a lot of representatives, they will, let's say they're interviewing for a company that sells cardiovascular drugs. Let's say they sold a cardiovascular drug. They're assuming that just because they're selling cardiovascular drugs too, that they know about their product, they know its benefits, they know its warts, they know its problems, and they know its history, they know when it launched. And the representative oftentimes will just assume this, that the person who's interviewing them knows all this information. Can't make that assumption ever. Even if they're in the same disease state, you need to go through and explain what product you were selling. What was it for? What was it indicated for? What were its positives? What were its negatives? What was the competition? What were you up against? What was your market share? What was theirs? Maybe you had some bad press. What happened there? Yes, you have to explain all that. And that will get them interested in the story. That will get them knowing what was going on, and they can feel like they were there. And I liken it to oftentimes to help people is say, imagine if you went on a vacation and you want to tell your friend about where you went. You would probably tell them all about, when you left, if especially it was a bad time when you left and it was early in the morning and something happened to the airplane, you're going to tell them about that. Then you're going to tell them what the hotel was like and what the food was like, and then what the weather was like, any excursions you went on, all of those things to make that person interested, to capture their attention. It's very similar to that.
Where do you see then, so you'll coach somebody, you'll have a client that will sign up for your coaching program, and where do you see them make the biggest gains? Like let me ask you a different way. Where are the quickest wins for someone listening to this podcast that may have an interview tomorrow and they don't have time to join your coaching program? They know that long-term, I probably want to buy Greg's book. I want to get with Greg, but I got an interview tomorrow. Like where are the quick wins?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because this was something that I added extra emphasis to on the 3rd edition to Acing the Sales Interview. And it was right when you get that first interview, it's even maybe a first phone screen. And maybe you're already beyond the phone screen and now you're meeting that person face to face, but you can use this on either one. And you walk in and you start talking to the person and they say, hey, I'm going to have you walk through your resume and I'm going to ask you some questions and I'll leave you time to answer questions. And this is the thing that has helped people the most who do it right. It's instead of just walking through your resume, you stop and you first ask permission to ask a question. Hey, before we get started, Roger, is it okay if I ask you a quick question? You say, sure, yeah, what's up? You're interested, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I wonder what this person's going to ask me. Nobody does this. This is better than just having the person walk through it. You go, hey, what was it about my resume or my background that made you even want to talk to me today? Well, that's having a strategy going in, right? That's kind of directing the interview the way you want to go it. And you get a lot of great information from that answer. That person, if they're a jerk and just says, no, just walk through your resume, I'd get up and walk out. Okay, I guess we're done here. I don't want to come work for you, which is okay. You just saved yourself a lot of time, effort, and a lot of headache. However, whatever they point out, well, then those are the areas that you're going to want to focus on when you walk through your resume. What then that helps the person is you can use that all the way through the interview process. Let's say you make it through that first interview and now you're going to go see him again. And you sit down, you got to start the interview, and it says, hey, on this interview, we're going to do more of a competency-based one. I'm not going to have you go through your resume. I'm going to ask you some questions. I'll leave you some time. How does that sound? That's great. Before we get started, can I ask you a quick question? So now you've got a call continuum going on. They're like, he ain't going to ask me the same question he asked me last time. They may not even remember.
Sure.
But if there's another
Yeah.
person there, which there typically is on the second interview, there's usually two. Now that person's intrigued. You go, hey, what was it about our last conversation that want to make you bring me back? So now you're getting to say more positive things about you. And that's the idea. It's no different than if I'm selling product X and Roger, you're wanting to buy product X and you already maybe use some form of that product. Hey, what do you like about this product? You want them to say good things about your product because psychologically, that person's going to be more willing to buy or buy something different if they're talking positively about you already. So it's all about the positive reinforcement.
I love that. And it's applicable well beyond a sales interview. It's really any interview because, a lot of people get very keyed up and they're pretty nervous going into an interview and they're letting the interviewer drive the entire thing. And which is really kind of a powerless feeling. And no wonder people get so nervous. But I think taking a little bit of that control back and asking that question, I mean, really, anybody that's listening to this, if you're going to interview, rewind this, 4 minutes and listen to that again, because that's some of the best interviewee advice I've ever heard, because they're literally going to tell you what you need to tell back to them to sell them into hiring you for the position. Because whether you're in sales or not, you're selling yourself in an interview. Like everyone's in sales if you're interviewing.
That's right. That's right. And
good stuff.
The great thing about that too is you can then use it at the end of the interview. So, and if they don't realize it when you do it, they'll realize it when they leave, which is the way you close and the way you end the interview. You're going to be bringing this back in. So, and when you have the strategy and know you're going to use it, then you become more confident. And that's what kind of you were talking about right there.
Yeah.
So let's say you're about to close, but you go, and one of the biggest mistakes I see people make, and it's not only in sales interviews, but it's in all interviews. Hey, tell me why you wouldn't hire me, or tell me why you wouldn't move me forward. Well, that's a negative question. Why go negative? Maybe they had already forgotten why they didn't want to move you forward, but you've already gotten past that. And now you're bringing it up in their head and they're like, oh yeah, you're right. I don't want to move you forward because now I remember why. Well, instead you say, hey, when we first started this interview, you told me you wanted to talk to me because of A, B, and C, whatever that was. And they'll say, yeah. Well, now that we've spent this, half hour or 45 minutes together, what are some additional competencies that you think I've demonstrated that now make me an even better fit than when we first started the conversation? You get them to say more good stuff about you. Much easier to close after somebody says that, isn't it?
Yeah. Almost like you know what you're doing, Greg. Almost like you know what you're doing. That's great. So certainly don't have to name names, but I think, I'd be interested, I'm sure other people, just like one or two examples of someone that came to you, kind of downtrodden and, man, I can't get a job and I've tried and I keep coming in second place, just kind of I think as a successful entrepreneur, it's the most, the money's great, but it's when somebody says, man, you helped change my life, or you really turn things around, help me turn things around for myself. Just, you have, is one or two examples off the top of the head that you can think of where, the wow factor?
Yeah, some of my early ones too. And this girl knows she's recommended me to hundreds of people probably. And I've mentioned her before, and her name's Molly. And her and another lady were actually always competing against the same jobs. And both of them would come in second or third every single time. I'm talking 17 or 18 times they had final bridesmaid interviews. And they were just, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. After working with both of them and their next interviews, they both got jobs. And I've worked with Molly multiple times now. And so, and a lot of it was, a lot of the practicing everything kind of we discussed, but it was really about her being genuine and telling the good star stories and really getting in the depth of the things that she did, but also following kind of the tactics and the strategies that I was talking about of, hey, going in and being positive and asking those questions and being more confident in some of the things, the way she was interviewing. And she has been now at her current company, and she's been promoted multiple times, and she's loving where she is. And, like I said, she's probably sent me 100 people.
I don't know if I could handle 17 or 18 non-hire separate interviews. Like, that's, bless her for even having the fortitude to keep going. Because at some point, like, maybe this isn't the career for me. Wow, good for her.
Well, and that's what I tell people too, is like, don't wait. Don't wait to have somebody say no. Even if you don't get a position, even if I work with someone, redo their resume, and they do all the interview coaching with me or my partner, and things don't work out, at least you know you've done everything you can, so that it isn't you that's holding you back, because it could be something else, right? They could already have somebody in mind, and you could just be a token person, which has happened to me many times. Or maybe it's just not the right fit. Maybe you don't like the person that you're interviewing with, or they don't like you for some reason. But at least you know it wasn't your skill set. It wasn't your lack of preparation. And eventually you're going to find the right fit. And that's when you're more open to find the right fit, is when you've done your due diligence and you've done everything you could.
Yeah, love it. All right. So I usually, thank you so much. Like this, and again, the just those little nuggets that you shared. I think if people that are about to interview, or even interviewing in the future, and again, it's not just interviewing for a new job; it's interviewing within your own company if you're upwardly mobile, to get additional positions of additional responsibility. So the nuggets you shared are absolutely fantastic. I always like to end with 3 questions, and the first one is, what is your absolute most favorite book, but it can't be a religious text? That's too obvious. So it has to be a non-religious text that's your favorite book and has impacted you the most.
Life Strategies by Dr. Phil.
Really?
Yeah.
And why so?
Changed my life. Changed my life completely as a kid. Young kid coming out of college, thought I knew everything. And just that book just slapped me right across the face. Just the thing I loved, I think I loved from that book the most was, you either get it or you don't. He's a West Texas guy, and he tells a story about, he and his friends were out drinking or whatever, and they were driving, it's in those days, I guess they could do that. And they get pulled over and one of the police officers, one of the kids gets mouthy with the police officer and says, "You can't pull us over. We weren't doing anything wrong," whatever it is. And the cop just punches him out. Like, that's illegal. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And
pretty sure.
Yeah. The cop says to Dr. Phil, "You got anything to say?" "No, sir." "Nope." He goes, at that moment, you got to realize, hey, this is their house, right? They are running the show, and you either get it or you don't. Yep. He goes, "My friend obviously didn't get it. That was that's that little small town cops area, and he runs it, whether it's legal or not."
Yep.
And so, he just puts it out there. You just got to know your environment. You have to, and that's why I just love Dr. Phil. He's just so direct. And he was also telling a story about Oprah and how she was getting, sued by the meat company, and her saying, "This isn't fair. This isn't fair." He goes, "It's not about fair. You either get it or you don't. You either fight back or you don't." And that's what truly changed my thinking in life was, hey, it doesn't matter whether it's fair. It doesn't matter whether it's right. You got to figure out your surroundings and know what's going to work. And it kind of relates to what I do now, right? I mean, hey, on all this interviewing stuff, there's so much information coming at you. You got to know what matters and what doesn't. And you got to realize, and like that girl, Molly, who 17 times didn't get hired, but she kept going and she did something about it and got better. And then she made sure there wasn't an 18th time. Right. So it for me, it all relates back to that.
Love it. Great. Second question, somewhat related. What's your favorite movie and why? And how has it impacted you?
Well, there's several, but if I have to put it down to one, it is The Natural with, and I'm not even a baseball guy. I played football in college, and I love The Natural. Robert Redford is amazing in that movie. And I love the story and the comeback and his fall from grace, and then his ability to turn it back around and come back. And kind of, I've had a kind of up and down road myself, right? So I kind of can relate to,
Sure.
hey, you do real well, you're doing awesome, and then all of a sudden you get knocked down. Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to get up or are you going to stay down? And that was all about getting up and bettering yourself.
It's the hero's journey, right? It's like the quintessential hero's journey. The hero usually gets the living heck beat out of him, he or she, and then has that guide who helps him or her up and to the end. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. And the last question is just, what question did I not ask you during this interview that you wish I would have?
Funny that you asked me that question, because I think you've told me that question before, and I asked it during an interview to a CEO once. And so he loved that question. So, there's nothing. I'm a pretty open book, Roger. Sure. Maybe it's what are you doing 5 years from now, right? Because
what are you doing 5 years from now?
Well, I do see myself. I am working with my new partner, Sean Pichler, and you know who that is. She and I are working together because I've gotten so busy that I can't handle a lot of the people who reach out to me. And I felt bad not having somebody else to send people to. So she's another person that I work with. But she and I are starting some other ventures too. We're going to try and automate a lot of this stuff too. And so I could see potentially, right now we're in the process of working with some computer guys to see how that's all going to work out. So potentially we're expanding on that and maybe doing some more there. I'm doing some real estate investing in Florida. So who knows, maybe I'll buy some more houses in Florida. But I also see myself still working in the industry, because regardless, I think I've learned in the past not to climb the corporate ladder, but to do what you love to do. And I love to coach people and I love to be with the client. And so, yes, I'm a district sales manager in this industry right now. As you know, I've had a lot other jobs in the industry. This is the one I really love. And so I'm doing what I love. Yeah. And so it's okay if I'm still doing this job. My current company allows me to do it and fulfill my passions otherwise. But this is what I love to do. I still see myself doing this and doing those outside ventures as well. Just not to really just make money, but to fill my cup.
No, you can see the passion come out when you talk about this. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Again, 2 books on Amazon. One is Acing the Sales Interview. It's the 3rd edition, updated. And then Acing Sales Interview Questions, both available on Amazon. And then you can connect. Where can they find you, Greg?
A couple different places. So I'm on LinkedIn at Gregory Novarro. Greg Novarro is my kind of personal LinkedIn account, but Gregory Novarro is more my consulting and coaching and things.
And we'll put it in the show notes, but that's N-O-V, not N-A. Yeah.
N-O-V. And then GregNovarro.com is another place. And I have a lot of free things that people can utilize there. So I have a list of pharma and medical device companies in alphabetical order that people can click on. It goes directly to their career sites. So that helps people in pharma and medical devices. And that's completely free of charge. I don't ask for email addresses, nothing. There's no advertising on there. And I get about 15,000 hits a month on that website. Wow. So it's pretty well utilized. And then I also give away, there's 4 LinkedIn videos of me explaining some of my secrets to LinkedIn and how to improve yourself. I used to charge for that during COVID. I decided I'm no longer going to charge for that because it was something I could give back, and I've kept it free since then. People can also reach me at GregNovarro.com too.
Love it. Well, sir, thank you very much. It was great to catch up. Great to hear how you're doing currently. And obviously you're helping a lot of people, man. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for tuning into the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any resources mentioned during the show. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. I'd also like to remind you to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, always remember to set your intentions for the day and strive to thrive.